This week I was invited to bring a little teaching to the 100 good people employed by UJA Toronto. It was in celebration of Purim. And I was so glad I went and able to listen to my old friend, now the president of UJA Toronto, Adam Minsky. He was reflecting on his trip to the Polish border with Ukraine. The first thing he said is that the silence is deafening. You would expect shouting and crying among the chaotic crowds of refugees, but he said there was hardly any speaking. Even the babies were quiet. Everyone was in such shock that even though the crowds were teeming at the border, there was silence. The Syrian refugee crisis, which we are still reeling from, saw 2 million people leave their homes over the course of 5 years. The Ukrainian refugee crisis, which has just begun, has already seen 2 million people flee for Poland, and another 1 million people to the neighboring countries, the other neighboring countries. And all this in 18 days. Purim is an irreverent celebration of the absurd. It is a mocking of the hateful, and it is a willingness to enter into the world of fantasy. No one ever could have imagined a fantasy like this, when the very first thing to welcome Ukrainian refugees over the border into Poland is an Israeli flag. But there it is, marking the field hospital that has been established at that site. Remarkable. Unbelievable. And not even Shalom Aleichem, with his wild imagination and his dark wit and his appreciation for the twists and turns of life, could ever have dreamt up that the Ukrainians would be turning to a Jew to lead the resistance against the Russians. Absurd, impossible, unthinkable. And yet here we are. The whole of the Western world has its eyes on President Vladimir Zelensky. This week he addressed Parliament and Congress. We pray that God will continue to watch over and protect him. This coming week I have 3 meetings already established to talk about how we can organize, how we can mobilize, with good partners like JIAS, like the World Union for Progressive Judaism, like the Reform RJCC, Reform Jewish Community of Canada, and here at Holy Blossom Temple as well. What can we do? Everyone's asking. We've written our checks, we've written another check and another check. What more can we do? There must be more we can do. And so we're joining now to ask that very question and soon be able to offer answers. In the meantime, though, please do look at the top of Holy Blossom's website. On the front page at the very top, there is a dedicated section there for how to support Ukraine, including B'nai B'rith now has a drive on for actual things that you can bring to a drop-off site. I think there are 2 dates, and that big shipment will be sent with urgency to support the refugees. A little bit of Torah, or a little bit of Megillah, now that we're still in the mood of Purim, although we are quickly turning to Pesach. In the Mishnah, it is written that there was a machloket, there was a rabbinic debate among 3 rabbis, asking what is the minimum amount of Megillah that we need to read in order to have fulfilled the mitzvah of reading Megillah. It's a very practical question. We're a very practical people. We want to know what's the bottom line requirement of us. And Rabbi Meir answers kula. He says simply, all of it. You need to read all of it. There's no skimping on Megillah. If you want to fulfill the mitzvah, read it all. Why would he say this? And this, by the way, is the winning opinion that the halacha picks up. But there are also minority views, which I'll share in a moment. But why does Rabbi Meir say read all of it? Why do you think? What's so important about every line, every verse of Megillah? What are we looking for? There are hints, right? There are scripts about what gave rise to this fear and to this near miss for the Jewish people. And so maybe Rabbi Meir says, read it all. Don't miss a beat, because the devil, literally, is in the details. Then comes the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says, you can start late in Megillah. You can start at chapter 2, verse 5. And if you go on from there, you still will have fulfilled the mitzvah of reading Megillah. So if you forget what happens in 2:5, I'll tell you. There it is written, there was a certain Jew. And we are introduced to Mordechai. So what does Rabbi Yehuda, mean when he says, start with verse 5 of chapter 2? Look for Mordechai. You have to know who are the models, the role models for Jewish living, for courage and heroism in the face of danger. We all need role models. We all need mentors. And we certainly need inspiration to teach us how a Jew should walk through the world, especially a dangerous world. The third opinion is attributed to Rabbi Yossi, who says, even more leniently, you can start very late. You can start with chapter 3, in fact. As long as you go on from there, you'll be all right, and you will have fulfilled the mitzvah of Megillah. So, in case you forget what chapter 3, verse 1 says, I will share with you, this is when we are introduced to none other than Haman. There it is written, after these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hamdata, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above his fellow officials. So Rabbi Yossi is saying, look out for the enemies. Notice about the rise of power of those who want to pollute the world with their hatred and their venom. Be on the lookout for the enemies. And then in the Gemara, written on top of this Mishnah, there's a fourth opinion. That might not surprise you. And that is attributed to none other than Shimon Bar Yochai. You may recall Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was the one who lived under the fist of Rome, and he went to hide in a cave. So what does he say? He who knew what it was like to live in a time of grave danger. He said, it's okay to start at chapter 6. If you start at chapter 6, verse 1, you're still all right, and you will have fulfilled the mitzvah of Megillah. So in case you forgot what happens in chapter 6, I will share with you. That night, sleep deserted the king. Ahasuerus is tossing and turning. And so he ordered the book of records, the annals, to be brought, and it was read to the king. And there it was found written that Mordechai had denounced Bigtan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, and had plotted to do away with King Ahasuerus. The king inquired, what honor or advancement has been conferred upon Mordechai for these deeds, for saving my life? Nothing at all has been done for him, replied the king's servants who were on attendance to him. "Who is in the court?" the king asked. For Haman, at just that moment, had entered the outer court of the royal palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai impaled on the stake. And the king's servants said, "Is that Haman standing in the court? Let him enter." And so he did. And the king asked him, "What should be done for a man whom the king desires to honor?" Haman said to himself, "Whom would the king desire to honor more than me?" And so Haman said to the king, "For the man whom the king desires to honor, let royal garb which the king has worn be brought, and a horse on which the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal diadem has been set. Let the attire and the horse be put in the charge of one of the king's noble courtiers, and let the man whom the king desires to honor be attired and paraded on the horse through the city square while they proclaim before him, 'This is what is done to the man whom the king desires to honor.'" And the king then said to Haman, "Quick then, get the garb and the horse, as you have said, and do this for Mordecai the Jew." This is the plot twist. Everything hinges and turns on a dime in chapter 6. If the king hadn't been tossing and turning, then he wouldn't have asked to read from the record. And if the servant hadn't read from the record, then he never would have known about Mordecai. And if he had never known about Mordecai, then the word wouldn't have gotten out that the Jews were in trouble. And so on, it goes from there. So what is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai teaching us when he says, start with chapter 6? He says, there are no accidents. There are no coincidences. There are hints of redemption everywhere. There are opportunities for miracles in every moment, in every era. And we need to leverage every single one for the good. So it is my prayer for all of us that we heed the wisdom of all four sages. Let us read every detail, every line, every news heading, every insight we can gather. Let us be on the lookout for heroes and take inspiration from them, particularly Jewish heroes like Splansky. They show us the way to walk through a dangerous world. And let us be on the lookout for our enemies. Let us know them even when they show just the first hints of hatred rising. And finally, let us always be on the lookout for those miracles and those seeds of redemption. Shabbat Shalom.